Hello, everyone. You might also be listening to this on my Patreon at patreon.com/Dave Chen. Today, we're going to do what we've been doing for the last 6 weeks, getting together with Dan Gvozden from the Amazing Spider Talk podcast to talk about the latest episode of What If, streaming right now on Disney+. Dan Gvozden, how goes it tonight?
I'm ready to party because some call me the party prince.
Nicely
No?
done.
Are you not going for that,
I think I got. I think
David?
I got the reference.
No, I'm sure you did.
So tonight we're going to be talking about season 1, episode 7 of What If. What if Thor was an only child, or what if Thor were an only child? I like that they got it grammatically correct in the episode title description. And I'm just going to say that this episode you're about to listen to is going to be pretty short, and we didn't put as much preparation into it even as like the last couple weeks worth of episodes. I mean, you might say, "Oh, David, you're telling me you put in any preparation at all in general?" And my answer is yes. We do put in some preparation. We talk about like, what things we're going to bring up. We might even prepare a little image or two to put in the YouTube channel or whatnot. And I've done that today, but I felt like it's weird to put more time into thinking about it than seemingly the people that made the show did. So this is going to be a pretty. This is I felt like this is a fairly inconsequential episode of the show. This will be an inconsequential recap of the show. Uh,
Great
let's.
way to get started.
I know.
Just turn it off now.
Do you just why? Literally, why are you watching right now? It is I question why I'm here. No, the reason I'm here, first of all, because we've had some amazing support from the people who do listen to us talk about this, and then also I just enjoy talking to Dan about the show. That's really what it comes down to. And if people want to listen in, great. What if Thor were an only child? Dan Gvozden, what do you think of episode 7 of What If? Overall
Well,
thoughts.
I think this is kind of a tale of two stories. One is kind of what you were getting at, which is it's pretty inconsequential. To me, this felt like a Saturday morning cartoon. And that doesn't mean that to be a kind of like a slight against this in any way. I grew up loving Saturday morning cartoons, but for the most part, they were pretty disposable adventures, and that wrapped up quickly and had very low stakes. And I felt like this is kind of in that vein. It's just kind of an excuse to be silly, and the minute it poses any kind of real conversation or like stakes, it wraps up immediately without really any uh, consequence or greater value. It's just a fun adventure. The amount of fun you have with it, I think, may vary. I did not find it particularly fun or funny or
It's
entertaining.
it's a fun adventure. I did not find it particularly fun, but it's a fun adventure.
I mean, at least it's trying to be.
Hmm.
I actually think it's weird because this one seems like it's aimed at the youngest audience of the bunch, and it's kind of like playtime brotherly antics that like I feel kids could get into, and it's buried pretty deep into a show that's had some pretty dark themes present. Not that kids can't handle that stuff.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
it's weird to kind of put this episode after the episode where Hank Pym murders all the Avengers because his daughter died during a Shield mission. And also, Doctor Strange tries and fails to bring his long lost love back into the universe, only to find that it ends up destroying everything that he's ever loved. Weird that this one comes right after those. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
feels like a little discordant tone wise. I'm
But this
just
is also exactly the kind of episode you bury late in the season because, Marvel is always trying to sell you on the importance of all the working pieces of Marvel. And this is probably the least important episode we've gotten yet in terms of like actually exploring these characters in new ways. I guess we maybe get a little new wrinkle on Thor. But then the second thing I mentioned is that it ends in a way that I think, for me at least, felt like the first time we really got solid confirmation of some kind that this is building towards some larger arc. And
mm.
so you've got a really inconsequential start, and then the last 5 seconds, which seem of absolute consequence to everybody watching the show moving forward.
Yeah. And also like this is another episode that like kind of doesn't end, right? Like
Yeah.
the like has or ends with a cliffhanger. So we'll get into that. We'll get into that.
I
But
do feel like this cliffhanger, and not to get too far deep in it, I felt like this cliffhanger was divorced enough from the main tale that it didn't bother me quite as much as some of the other cliffhangers. Like I
mhm.
felt like the initial tale kind of wrapped
Right,
itself
right,
up.
because the main storyline in this episode concluded, and then you had a little
Right,
dash of Ultron at the end, right?
right.
Uh, so yeah, Saturday morning cartoon is one way of describing it. I would say like honestly, it reminds me of like sitcom, like old school sitcoms, like
Mm.
Step by Step or Family Matters, like the TGIF thing. This could be a, or even older than that, right? Like in sitcoms from like Nick at Night or whatever, where like, ooh, like we're gonna go party and like. And actually, there was an episode of I think the Hulu original series MODOK, the based on the Marvel character, right? You know what I'm talking about?
Right. Yeah,
That
yeah.
actually was an exact kind of replica of this plot line. Basically, they open a dimension to these aliens that are like they party too hard, and they party so hard that they're eventually going to like take over the entire planet, basically.
Okay.
And so I felt like I was like, watching I had deja vu watching this basically
Well, it
from
was
another,
interesting
yeah.
because this episode like flirts with that idea, right? There is this like part where you see the globe and it's getting covered in red dots, which indicate big parties, and there's a suggestion that there's like a meteorite that like, or this partying destroyed another planet that Thor was on, but they never really want to put their foot down because I feel like maybe casting Thor in a light that he has destroyed other planets might make him look bad, and they're kind of wary about doing that. I don't know. It felt kind
I,
of
I
nebulous to me.
I would agree with you. I wish they had the courage of their convictions to say Thor is committing genocide with his parties. Like they
Of
should have just
course.
said he's a genocidist. His parties are bad for whatever world they're in. They're literally genocide. But they didn't want to go there, and as a result, this story feels even dumber than I think it already felt to begin with.
I just wanted like one of the showrunners to just walk out in front of the animation and turn to the screen and say, "Thor is committing genocide. I hope you're aware of this."
Excelsior.
Excelsior.
That would have been amazing.
I want the reanimated corpse of Stan Lee to walk out and say that.
So the premise of this episode is: what if Thor were an only child? And the idea is that rather than Loki and Thor being raised together, that Loki is given back to his people and they're raised separately, right?
Yeah, that's accurate. Although we don't really see any of that or like how that changed. It's just that Thor seems a little more like unhinged or like
I guess the idea is that because Loki must have been like quite an imp growing up, that now that place is occupied by Thor. But
yeah.
wasn't Thor kind of a lively individual in his origin story movie anyway? You know what I mean?
He absolutely was. I mean, you can remember him like turning over a table and the like 10 slow-mo shots that Kenneth Branagh did to capture that. I mean, that Thor gets banished, you know. I mean, I guess he goes to war against the frost giants. So that's what gets him banished. And here that's not really the case. But like maybe this should have been called like what if Odin took a nap early? Like that's kind of where we're at here.
Yeah, but as I was mentioning, it kind of felt like like a classic sitcom trope of like we're having a party and the parents are out of town, like we don't want them to know about it, and they basically made up the flimsiest of premises to get to that point. You know?
I wish they had leaned into that more because like the whole bit where he's like, my mom is gonna come back, which like we'll get to that to me was like had the most opportunity for levity, which is to like play up this like the parents are gone, let's party, everybody trashes the house, and you're trying to keep it clean, but you can't stop your party from growing. Like to me, that would have been the more fun episode than just like having Thor care about it at the last minute.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
fun of that trope is that the person throwing the party loses control and the party rages on without them, and suddenly they're going to be screwed as soon as Odin wakes up and Frigga shows up on Midgar, so to speak.
You mentioned how in the show notes that like you see paintings of Thor and Loki's childhood, and the art and design of these is actually beautiful to look at. I think the design overall of the What If series is quite beautiful. You see all the concept paintings at the end. I've always been impressed with those. I would agree with you here. Also, tell us more about Thor: The Party Prince, Dan Gvozden.
Yeah, so this Thor as like a major partier is not really anything entirely new, although we've not ever seen it in this kind of a modern context in the comic books. Jason Aaron is this writer who wrote Thor for like I think at least a decade, maybe approaching a decade, and he would often include Thors from different points in time, an old Thor, a young Thor, and with pre Mjolnir when he has just his axe, and that Thor would just show up on Earth and go and join the Vikings and party and pillage and rape, and he was a Thor that is very much immature, and the Thor that we know from Norse mythology, and so you kind of get the idea in the comics that this like younger Thor was a partier, a bit more unhinged, and when we meet Thor, he's in that middle of that transition into he would eventually become the All Father himself. So this concept is something that is inherent to the character, that he is a bit of a larger than life character that goes to Earth, to Midgar specifically, to party and get his rocks off, so to speak, down on Earth.
Thanks for
Yes,
that.
you're welcome.
There's some good questions in the chat. KS is asking, is the Loki that we know always suppressing his actual form? And Langley M. Neely says Frigga taught him her magic for shapeshifting. So in theory, yes, but he never knew he was a frost giant. I guess in our universe, right?
Well, I mean, he learned he was a frost giant in the first Thor movie. There's scenes where he
but you know what I mean, like
blue.
until the first Thor movie. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, he had no idea that he was a frost giant. As far as I understand.
Yeah.
And I think it changes based on your interpretation. We have seen the frost giant Loki before in the Loki series. It was one of the variants.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I always assumed that just being on Asgard itself was like enough to maybe suppress that growth. But it was for me, it was always kind of a wink. But the Frigga teaching him the shapeshifting, I'll buy that too. I don't know if that's explicit, but I'll buy that as a reasoning.
So they start partying, and then they arrive at Earth rather than arriving in the middle of the desert as in Thor 1. Thor and his buddies arrive in Vegas and they start partying.
A different part of the middle of the desert.
Right. Just like probably like 50 miles away or 300 miles away from Thor 1. And they start partying. We meet a ton of characters, a lot of little Easter eggs, a lot of Howard the Duck action in What If. Don't you think, Dan? They're like, wow, that thing you saw in the background, we're going to make sure that's a huge part of the What If franchise.
I mean, if you're going to do it anywhere, I guess this is the place to do it.
Exactly.
And, I mean, if they do a What If Avengers, right, at the end of all this where they all team up, I have to assume they're going to want to make Howard the Duck part of that.
There is Maria Hill shows up to be like, hey, by the way, Nick Fury got knocked unconscious. We also see the Grandmaster played by Jeff Goldblum in the movies, not played by Jeff Goldblum in this episode, though. We'll get to the cast list later. A lot of extreme revelations in the cast list, by the way, Dan Gvozden.
I'm surprised. I actually thought it was Jeff Goldblum. So that says a lot about how that voice actor, I think, did a great job.
Indeed. Actually, wait, sorry. It was Jeff Goldblum. I apologize.
Oh, okay. Well,
so that's why you thought it was.
Great job, Jeff Goldblum, doing Jeff Goldblum.
Great job, Jeff Goldblum. Sorry, I misread the cast list originally. It's interesting. It's just so interesting who they get every week. Do you know what I mean? Like, you'd think like, oh, well, they're definitely not going to get blank, and then they get blank. But then you think like, oh, well, then they would definitely get blank, and then they don't get blank. You know, like and we'll go over it. We'll go over it. So, okay,
I thought of the cast members like Jane and Darcy, who are two characters I've never really connected all that much with. Again, I'm hoping that the Love and Thunder movie
right.
changes my mind about Jane. But man, Darcy, I just find her so annoying. And I know you're meant to, but I think you're also meant to laugh at some of her jokes. And her antics just do not do it for me.
You do not find her buffoonery amusing, unfortunately.
I do not. I do not.
So there's a massive party, and Maria Hill is like, "We got to get help for this party. We got to get Captain Marvel." Now, several thoughts on this. First of all, the Battle of New York and the Avengers was not a big enough reason to get Captain Marvel. But Thor partying, an act which, as far as I understand, in this episode, killed no individual. That is something that you need to get Captain Marvel for, right?
Yeah,
According to the logic of the show.
this to me is the start of like the real breakdown. Like all of the other what ifs have been so concerned with Marvel continuity. This one does not care at all.
Correct. It's just an excuse to have some fun.
Yeah.
The other thing, by the way, about Captain Marvel, I wanted to ask you is she identifies herself as Captain Marvel in this episode. I think, right? Like she's like, "I'm Captain Marvel" at one point.
Right.
I think that's the first time. I may be wrong about this, but I feel like that's the first time we've ever heard anyone in the MCU utter that phrase, like Captain Marvel.
That sounds right. I don't know because I've only watched Captain Marvel once because I don't like that movie very much. Um, Not for reasons some people might want to cast you just not liking that movie. Um, but that does sound right to me. That is true. That's interesting. I mean, it's like the same thing as like the zombie episode where that's the first time we got a confirmation that Uncle Ben exists. It's like, why is this happening here?
Well, I think the
Although,
issue is, do we know why she's called Captain Marvel in the MCU?
well, I mean, Marvel is a guy in the MCU, um, and so that she could just be taking that name.
Yeah.
That's the best explanation I could come up with. I mean, timeline wise, it makes sense that she's been gone for what 20 years by this point, and not aging up. So at least makes sense to me that she would maybe have developed a name in that time.
Langley Neely in the chat is saying in WandaVision they call her Captain Marvel. So,
Oh, really?
but I guess this would be the first time she self-identifies as that then, right? 'Cause
Okay.
she wasn't in WandaVision as far as I recall. So
Yes, that sounds accurate. You're right. Now it's coming back to me. I'm thinking about that. Yeah.
So the all in the game in the chat, by the way, says episode did a bad job depicting the damage being done to the planet by Thor. They showed it too late in the episode. I would agree with that. I think you're meant to feel like, oh my gosh, he's completely obliterating everything on the planet Earth. I didn't really get that feeling until very late into the episode. Anyway,
Yeah.
we all agree the genocide angle is really downplayed. So
Yeah. And I want to say we came up with a really good answer for how they could have solved that.
who's we?
Oh, you and I.
Oh yeah, that's right. With the walk on stage. Yeah. Okay.
Right. Can I say something about
Yes.
the Captain Marvel? Because this to me was like the most problematic part of this episode. Because I mean, they literally call her party pooper here. And there's also a line like that Thor says to her about like, hey, like maybe you should smile more. And if you remember when that movie came out, that was like a whole part of the cultural discourse. I would say the part of the cultural discourse I don't want to be lumped into, which is like, hey, she looks so gruff on the poster. Why doesn't she smile? And that whole kind of like trope of like, smile, nice lady. And I just felt like I know that Thor is meant to look like the bad guy here, and his comments to her are meant to, like prickle a little bit. But Thor has always been a hero, and to put those words in a mouth of one of Marvel's top heroes about Captain Marvel, and to kind of like have her actually be this kind of, at least in this episode, appear to be this kind of heartless, character that I think Brie Larson worked really hard to not make her, you know, against that stereotype. I think really sells that character short and leans into the worst parts of the cultural conversation surrounding that character.
No disagreement here. By the way, Langley M. Neely reminds us that her mentor Marvel was played by Annette Bening in the movie, so just wanted to call that out as well.
Right.
The thing is, Dan, I think what you're ignoring is the fact that Captain Marvel and Thor have a kick-ass fight scene. So doesn't that make all those problems you had go away? Like none of that matters anymore, right? Because of the kick-ass fight scene.
I'm not going to take your bait, David. The answer is no, but I do like that fight scene, and I do think like seeing, you know, we got a little bit of the Captain Marvel visualization in Endgame and at the end of her movie, but it is fun to see her powers light up. They have a really unique visual associated with them, but it is not enough to erase my feelings about her characterization.
Well, that's kind of on you then, don't you think?
It's possible.
It's kind of cool that the fight happens like all these different places around the world. Like that's a
Yeah,
cool concept.
it is cool.
And I like how they bring it to life in the show.
It also reminds me of like National Lampoon's European Vacation, where they accidentally knock down Stonehenge.
I
Anyone
like
else?
how honestly my favorite part of the episode, no joke, is when Captain Marvel's like, "Hey, you can't mess with these things. We don't even know what they're for, really."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh, like a fitting tribute to our opinion on Stonehenge."
I love that like Stonehenge remains a mystery. Meanwhile, you've got like Skrulls wandering around and stuff. You know, it's like, is Stonehenge alien in origin? Look, if Captain Marvel doesn't even know, truly no one will know.
I think Stonehenge was a part of Thor, the first film, though, right? If I recall, it was in the MCU. Like Stellan Skarsgård was like running around naked in Stonehenge, if I recall
I
correctly.
believe that's Thor: The Dark World, but I
There you
could be
go.
wrong. Again, another one I don't revisit very often, as you and I have discussed.
On that note, by the way, speaking of references to the MCU, there's also. Did you catch there is a very subtle reference when Captain Marvel and Thor are standing across from each other, and Thor calls the hammer, and it like rushes past her head,
Oh,
and I felt like
are
that
you
was a
referring to
reference
like?
to when that exact same thing happens in Avengers Endgame. Uh, like the hammer like rushes back her head and blows her hair a little bit. I thought that was like a
Yeah,
cool subtle reference. Anyway,
cool. Yeah, I think. I mean, they're gonna litter these things with that. It
yeah.
is a little bit disappointing that that is maybe like one of the more iconic Captain Marvel moments. You know, like a hammer went by her hair, but there we go.
All right, so they fight, and then Thor is like, "Oh wow, my mom's coming. We got to clean everything up." And then they do, and then Captain Marvel kind of supports Thor in the end by making up some shit for an iPad, and that's basically the whole story. Then we have a couple of interesting things at the end. Now, before we do the ending, is there anything else you want to talk about in the main show?
Well, I mean, I will say I did like the kind of like quick montages of all the Norse mythology
Mm-hmm.
characters like wreaking havoc. You know, I liked Surtur kind of like going up to the Statue of Liberty and melting its arm off, and putting it back on. And I thought there was a kind of clever Superman 3 reference where you've got Thor, showing up to push the Tower of Pisa back up, which is something that he does in Superman 3. So, not he, I mean,
Yeah,
Superman does.
the greatest of the Supermans.
Right, exactly. I have to think that that was a direct reference to that movie. I mean, some of this stuff is fun, but like, yeah, I didn't think there were like really enough jokes that sustain the comedy format, which I'm
Mm.
totally
By the way,
open to them going
Auburn
down.
Man points out Thor's hammer should not be hard to lift because it was not enchanted in this universe.
Hmm.
Hmm. Because I guess like in the Thor movie, right? Like Anthony Hopkins like kind of whispers the thing into the hammer, right?
Right,
But
and
I
then
guess
throws it through the
theoretically
portal.
in this one he does not do that.
That is interesting. Yeah.
Ergo, the episode makes no sense. Okay, so a couple things. Someone in the chat points out like this is the first time the Watcher, Jeffrey Wright's character, is really surprised by anything in the show.
Yeah, he does seem thrown up. He's like mid wrap up because he knows the formula of these episodes, and he gets distracted, and but by this Ultron thing showing up, and I think this is where we're gonna kind of start seeing that like end. I mean, we're approaching the end of the season, and to me, you have the Watcher, and he's watched, Doctor Strange's universe kind of end, and here he's seeing this new threat. Like I think he's grown a bit attached to humanity. Not that I feel like the episodes have done this and established this, but I suspect that he has grown attached to humanity. He's caught off guard, and he's going to assemble whatever you want to call them, the what if Avengers, to prevent this Ultron army that shows up here.
I
That
would
is at
say
least my
literally one of the reasons
suspicion.
I continue to do this with you is because I feel like, hey, there might be some mildly interesting payoff at the end with like different universes coming together. And I feel like we need to see this through to the end to see whether or not that actually occurs,
Yeah,
or how that occurs.
I would
So
put my money on it. And before people yell at me about we've already seen it in the trailers, I have to take your word for it because I'm not watching the trailers. Because to me, the joy of What If is being surprised by the what if of it all. So I'm avoiding those trailers. But yes, people keep shouting at me. Yes, you've already seen it in the trailers. Great, great.
Uh, Langley Neely, by the way, comes in the chat and he's saying the hammer was always enchanted for Thor. Odin enchants it so it doesn't work for Thor too. Thor as well, I think he's what he's saying. I just don't know enough about the state of enchantment for the hammer to know whether or not that's accurate. Um,
I mean, in the comic, it's always been enchanted.
I see.
But I mean, he does specifically whisper to it in the first movie.
Right.
Whosoever, be worthy shall have the power of Thor, and to me, that signaled that he was doing
Yeah.
some kind of enchantment there. So,
Whosoever holds this hammer, if he be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor. That's what
all
the
right,
quote is.
there
So,
it is.
yeah.
Yeah.
So then at the very end of this episode, there is a shot of who is the person that shows up at the end, Dan
It's
Gvozden?
Ultron, and Ultron shows up, and you can see in his chest are the Infinity Stones, and then his like face mask flips up, and we see the Vision's face with the Mind Stone in his head inside of Ultron. And if you remember back to Age of Ultron, the whole like thing that Ultron was trying to do is get himself like the Mind Stone and transfer his essence into Vision's body before the Avengers kind of thwarted that. So this thing I'm guessing he's showing up from another universe where the what if is what if Ultron happened to get the Vision's body. So we're seeing that character like
I
bleeding over into this
see.
world.
You think it's a different universe that he's coming in from, basically,
I mean, it could be also in this Thor universe, but
right?
my guess is maybe one of the next episodes is showcasing that what if, like what if Ultron was successful in getting Vision's body? Maybe not, but to me, they're playing with the multiverse. It makes more sense that he's just invading all these different universes, and because there's multiple Ultrons, or I guess they could be Ultron robot henchmen. We don't really know. Um, there were plenty of Ultron henchmen in Age of Ultron. But if I had to put my money on it, I'd say he's probably from a different universe. But again, I have nothing supporting that other than that he comes through a portal.
I think that there's only so many times you can pull the card of we're going to conclude with like a quick dolly shot into a guy wearing gold with several of the Infinity Stones.
Oh yeah, I mean, especially after Loki, where the Infinity Stones were rendered like paperweights. So
I'm just saying we
like,
had was it last week or the week before where it was literally the same shot that ended that way, but it was zombie Thanos, and so it was a couple
right,
episodes ago, and then now it's
yeah.
like, um, you know, it's Ultron, and next week it's going to be Tony Stark as the who knows, but like, uh, I hope they don't do it again. That's all I'm saying.
Well, maybe we're going to get zombie Thanos versus Vision Ultron and their horde armies against each other with our Avengers caught in the middle.
It's time to play our favorite game, Dan. Rank the cast of the episode. Okay? So I'm actually gonna. So let's. I'm gonna put this list up momentarily, but Chris Hemsworth was Thor. I was shocked to discover that Natalie Portman plays Jane Foster in this
I
episode.
know. They really got her for Love and Thunder.
Yeah,
They got her like the whole package.
Tom Hiddleston plays Loki. That doesn't surprise me because he was just in Loki, right?
Yeah, and he's like a team player for this whole Marvel thing.
Kat Dennings plays Darcy. Samuel L. Jackson plays Nick Fury. Jeff Goldblum plays Grandmaster. Colby Smulders plays Maria Hill. Clark Gregg plays Agent Coulson. They even got Frank Grillo to play Brock Rumlow, which is cool.
Yeah.
Love Frank Grillo. Really expressing disappointment at not being able to use the full might of the American military in this episode.
Yeah.
Taika Waititi plays Korg. Karen Gillan plays Nebula. And now we start to get into potentially people that didn't play their original. Seth Green, by the way, plays Howard the Duck. So Lady Sif is a character that's in this episode, and I don't know who plays her in. Let's see, who plays her in the MCU?
She was just in Loki.
Right.
Yeah, it's Jamie Alexander.
So they got the act. Yes. So she's portrayed by Jamie Alexander. She's also portrayed by Jamie Alexander in this episode. And then they did not get Brie Larson. So
that doesn't surprise me.
Alexandra Daniels plays Brie Larson, and I actually overall thought the people who did the voice work were like very strong this episode, because I think they didn't feel like they were doing impressions. It didn't feel like I was trying to listen to someone do a Brie Larson impression. You know what I mean?
Right.
But like I like it when they try to capture the spirit of the person. Another example, Josette Eels, who played Frigga. I don't think she sounded like Rene Russo at all, in my opinion, but still thought it was a solid performance.
And they're minor performances, so it's totally okay. And I thought that the character who played Captain Marvel, it was a different tone of voice to match the different tone I think that they went with for Captain Marvel in this episode, even though I find it relatively problematic. I felt like the voice matched the characterization.
You had Fred Tatasciore playing Volstagg and Drax in this episode, so they didn't get Dave Bautista. And Dan Gvozden, I'm pleased to announce that we had to save some surprises for this recap show. But I'm pleased to announce that David Chen portrayed the voice of Hogan in this episode. And I know
that is a surprise.
You were wondering, like, David Chen, when are you going to tell everyone that David Chen played the voice of Hogan? And
now
I'm saving the reveal for this episode.
Now I know why you wanted to continue this show. You just had to get to your appearance, and this is it, I'm guessing.
Well, I had to I had to be able to tell everyone that David Chen plays Hogan in this episode.
Are you disappointed that I didn't comment on how much I love that voice actor?
Extremely. Not only am I disappointed, I'm holding it against you permanently in terms of like friendship points.
Oh, great.
So it's very disappointing. I'm very disappointed, and forever will be. So put that out there.
All right. Well, I got to undig myself from that grave.
I also have to point out that David Chen actually played two voices in this episode.
It's weird that you keep referring to yourself in the third person.
Well, I need to be clear about which roles David Chen is playing. You see, David Chen played Hogan in this episode, but if you look closely at the additional voices, you will see that David Jordan Chen was also an additional voice in this episode. So David Chen was an additional voice and Hogan. And he's recapping this episode with Dan Gvozden. That's what I call a triple threat, Dan.
I mean, it's fascinating that you posed this whole thing as a discovery when really it was just a thinly veiled humble brag. Yeah,
I mean, first of all, you know what a pet peeve of mine is? When people misuse the term humble brag. There's a difference between humble brag and just brag, Dan.
Got it.
Humble
Okay,
brag. Humble
fair.
brag is there is something in it that is like takes you down a peg. That's what a humble brag is. So it's
Mm.
almost like you net out at zero because it's like I'm bragging about something, but also I'm humble about something. Whereas a brag is just I am saying why I'm awesome. Period. The end.
I think I was thrown because of how you couched it. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
you're treating it as like so perfunctory, and yet, enough that we didn't even notice it to bring up, and yet it's also being bragged about.
Indeed. Well, anyway, I just wanted everyone to know David Chen played Hogan in this episode. David Chen was an additional voice in this episode. Yes, I agree it's a big deal. Okay, but
Has this bit worked for everybody? I wonder.
I don't know what bit you're talking about,
All right.
Dan. Closing thoughts on the episode. We failed horribly at making this recap shorter than the others, by the way.
Well, I hope people have enjoyed it regardless. Final thoughts. First of all, I think this episode has a really bad opinion of only children.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh no, he just doesn't have a brother. All these bad things are going to happen. And then,
He's
also,
gonna. You mean he's gonna become a genocidal maniac?
yes, that's exactly it. If only Hitler had a brother or something. I don't know if he had a brother or
Loki
not.
was Thor's art school, basically.
That was it. Yes, Loki was There's a sentence I want to get on a T-shirt. But and the other thing is, like, I don't want to say that, like, I want them to take chances like this and say, you know what, let's do one that's continuity light and really funny. I just think it needs to be better if they're going to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it felt like, hey, let's have a little fun. Honestly, it felt like you're talking about Saturday morning cartoons. It felt like kids on Saturday morning just mashing their action figures together and being like, what if Captain Marvel fought Thor and, in Utah and now in England and blah, and in the Arctic, it's just like, okay, that's fine.
Those are also the least interesting what if comics, when things are like this. It's how I felt about, like, here I'm about to, like, really light up the chat. It's how I felt about like most of the Mandalorian, which we used to call it in my recaps Jon Favreau's action figure half hour, and that's what I would basically quantify the worst episodes of the show being.
All right, folks. Well, I'm David Chen. You can listen to a podcast version of this conversation at patreon.com/Dave Chen, along with a bunch of other stuff like my review of Dear Evan Hansen, thoughts on this year's Emmys, a bunch of cool bonus content there at patreon.com/Dave Chen. Check out more of Dan's work at amazingspidertalk.com. Dan Gvozden, thanks as always for joining me today.
It was a lot of fun. And did you know The Mandalorian was nominated for a writing Emmy?
I did know that.
I'm baffled by it, but there are other things to complain about.
Dan, this channel already gets enough hate/lack of watching. I don't
Come
need
at
you
me,
adding
everybody. Leave David alone. Come at me.
Go at Dan. All right, see you guys later.